She says he's being aggressive, and before he can speak, security drags him away in front of a silent crowd. But what no one knows is, 3 minutes later, he legally takes control of the entire airline and shuts it down without warning. Thousands wake up to canceled flights, locked offices, and a name they'll never forget. Why did he do it? And what secret from his past made this more than just revenge? Flight attendant kicks Black Billionaire off the plane, just for asking to sit in his assigned seat. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun cast long shadows across the private hangar at LAX, where a sleek black SUV sat idling. Inside, Elijah Ward gazed through tinted windows at his grounded private jet, his expression neutral despite the inconvenience. A team of FAA inspectors swarmed around the aircraft like busy ants, their yellow vests bright against the gray tarmac. His assistant, seated in the front passenger seat, turned around with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ward. The inspection was completely unscheduled. I've managed to get you a last-minute ticket on Astralift Airlines. It's the only flight that will get you to New York in time for the board meeting." Elijah's dark eyes flickered briefly to his assistant's face. He gave a slight nod, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Coach is fine," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of authority without raising its volume. He adjusted his black hoodie, a designer piece that looked deliberately casual, and checked that his noise-canceling headphones were secure around his neck. In the tech world, Elijah Ward was a titan, his face splashed across magazine covers and business websites. But dressed down like this, he moved through the world like a shadow, exactly as he preferred. The SUV delivered him to Terminal 4. Elijah walked through security with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and purposeful. Fellow travelers barely glanced his way, their eyes sliding past him as if he were invisible. He'd learned long ago that this invisibility could be both a burden and a tool. At the gate, the boarding process was already underway. Elijah waited patiently in the priority line, boarding pass ready on his phone. The gate agent's scan was quick and impersonal, and he entered the jet bridge without fanfare. The cabin of the Astralift aircraft hummed with pre-flight activity. Passengers stuffed bags into overhead compartments and shuffled down the narrow aisle. A few looked up as Elijah passed, but their gazes never lingered. Just another tall black man in casual clothes, nothing to see here. Approaching row 2, Elijah stopped at seat 2A, the business class bulkhead. A white man in his 50s occupied the seat, spreading out as if marking his territory. His suit was expensive but slightly rumpled, his manner carrying that particular brand of entitled confidence. Elijah cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice measured and professional. "I believe you're in my seat." He held up his phone, displaying the boarding pass clearly. The man barely glanced at the screen before his lips curled into a dismissive sneer. "That's not your seat, bro," he said, emphasizing the last word with subtle mockery. "You must be confused." "I assure you I'm not confused," Elijah replied, still calm. He zoomed in on the boarding pass display. "Seat 2A, I can show you again." The commotion attracted the attention of Marcy Whitmore, who approached with clipped steps and a practiced customer service smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took in the scene, and something in her expression shifted when she looked at Elijah. A subtle tightening around her mouth, a slight narrowing of her eyes. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. But her body language had already chosen sides, angling toward the seated passenger. "This gentleman seems to be confused about his seat assignment," the man in 2A said, his tone suggesting Elijah was anything but a gentleman. Before Elijah could respond, Marcy cut in. "Sir, if you could step back from the seat, please." Her voice carried that particular tone, crisp, dismissive, slightly condescending. It was a tone Elijah had heard countless times before, a tone that spoke volumes about assumptions and prejudices. "Ma'am," Elijah said quietly, "I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. I'm happy to show you." "Sir," Marcy interrupted, her voice growing sharper, "you're making a scene. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice." Elijah hadn't raised his voice at all. He stood perfectly still, aware of the passengers around them starting to stare, some already pulling out their phones to record. The familiar weight of these moments settled on his shoulders, the weight of having to be perfectly controlled, perfectly calm, knowing that any reaction would be used against him. Marcy reached for her phone. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to call security." Elijah said nothing. His silence spoke volumes, but Marcy either couldn't or wouldn't hear it. She was already dialing, her movements quick and decisive, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Security arrived within minutes, 2 burly officers who filled the narrow aisle. They approached with hands near their belts, their expressions stern. "This passenger is being disruptive," Marcy reported, her professional mask barely concealing her satisfaction. "He's refusing to accept his seat assignment and causing a disturbance." Elijah allowed himself to be escorted off the plane without resistance. He could feel the heat of dozens of phone cameras following his exit, could hear the murmur of passengers creating their own narratives about what they'd just witnessed. As he passed Marcy, he caught the slight upturn of her lips. Not quite a smirk, but close enough. The aircraft doors closed behind him with a final sounding thunk. Elijah sat in one of the terminal's uncomfortable chairs, his posture perfect despite the plastic molding. His expression remained unreadable as he pulled out his phone and unlocked it with his thumbprint. With precise movements, he opened a secure app, its interface sleek and minimalist. The app's header read, "Acquisition Trigger," in subtle gray text. A single notification pulsed on the screen. "Board trigger confirmed. Proceed?" Elijah's finger hovered over the notification, his reflection in the dark screen as still as a statue. Elijah's thumb descended on the screen with quiet precision. The yes button pulsed once, then faded as the system activated. Years of careful planning, countless lines of code, and meticulously crafted legal frameworks whirred into motion with that single touch. He slipped the phone into his pocket and moved to a nearby bench, positioning himself where he could observe the aircraft through the terminal's vast windows. Passengers continued boarding, unaware of the digital storm brewing in the corporate stratosphere. A young family hustled past the gate counter, late but relieved to make their flight. An elderly couple helped each other with their carry-ons. The man who had taken his seat was probably settling in, perhaps already ordering a pre-flight drink from Marcy. His phone vibrated. 3 separate messages from his legal team confirmed the transmission of confidential purchasing offers to selected hedge funds. Each message was encrypted, each word carefully chosen. The machinery of high finance began its work, invisible but inexorable. As Elijah watched the ground crew prepare for departure, his mind drifted back 9 months, to the day that set this plan in motion. He remembered sitting in his office at Ward Corps headquarters, the Seattle skyline shrouded in its usual morning mist. The report had come from Dr. Sarah Chen, head of the Civil Ethics Division, a department he'd created specifically to monitor corporate accountability across various sectors. "Mr. Ward," she had said, her face serious on the video call, "we've detected concerning patterns in our analysis of Astralift Airlines operational data." Her screen shared a series of graphs and heat maps. "The statistical anomalies in passenger removals are significant, particularly when broken down by demographic factors." Elijah had leaned forward, his attention caught by the stark visual representation of what many had long suspected. The numbers told a story of systematic bias, not overt enough to trigger regulatory attention, but clear to those who knew where to look. "Show me everything," he had said. The audit that followed was comprehensive, conducted with the quiet efficiency that characterized all Ward Corps operations. Using advanced data analytics and a network of carefully placed sources, they pieced together a disturbing picture of Astralift's corporate culture. The pilot application statistics were particularly damning. Over 3 years, not a single black pilot applicant had made it through the final round of hiring, despite many having exemplary qualifications and experience. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Then there were the buried misconduct cases. 3 separate incidents of racial discrimination had been systematically covered up, the victims silenced with settlements and ironclad NDAs. Former employees, speaking under condition of anonymity, described an environment where diversity was treated as a PR exercise rather than a genuine commitment. It's all about the image, one former HR manager had confided. They want to look progressive in their advertising, but behind closed doors, it's a different story. Elijah had absorbed these reports with the same outward calm he maintained in all situations. But beneath that composed exterior, each new detail had stoked a familiar fire. The same one that had burned since childhood, watching his mother face discrimination at her banking job, seeing her dignity stripped away piece by piece until she finally quit. The acquisition plan had formed methodically, like all his strategies. Through a carefully constructed network of shell companies, WardCorp began acquiring AstraLift shares. The purchases were spaced out, kept below reporting thresholds, handled through different brokers. By the time he boarded that flight this morning, his holdings had reached 12.6%. Significant, but not enough for control. Now, as Elijah sat in the terminal watching the AstraLift plane prepare for takeoff, his phone lit up with a series of rapid-fire notifications. The hedge funds were responding to his premium offer. The first acceptance came through, then the second, and finally the third. Each fund agreed to sell at 2.5 times market value, an offer too generous to refuse, especially given AstraLift's recent underperformance. His secure line rang. "Mr. Ward," his lawyer's voice was precise, professional. "The transactions are complete. With the proxy agreements in place, you now control 52.4% of board voting power." A pause. "It's done." Elijah stood, smoothing his hoodie with practiced ease. Around him, the airport continued its eternal rhythm of arrivals and departures. A new flight was already being announced at his gate, passengers lining up with their boarding passes ready. The AstraLift plane that had rejected him was now taxiing toward the runway, its passengers unaware that their airline had just changed hands. He straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of what was to come. The next chapter was about to begin. Elijah emerged from the airport terminal into the crisp morning air. His steps were unhurried, measured, as he made his way across the terminal parking lot. The concrete beneath his polished shoes still glistened with early dew as the sun peeked over the horizon. A black SUV identical to the one that had dropped him off earlier waited in a designated spot, its engine quietly humming, wispy exhaust barely visible in the cool morning light. The driver, a woman in a sharp black suit, opened the door for him without a word. Her eyes, alert and professional, acknowledged him with a slight nod. Inside, the vehicle's interior was a mobile command center. A tablet had been mounted on a flexible arm extending from the center console, its screen already alive with a secure connection interface. The familiar WardCorp encryption protocols scrolled across the display, confirming the channel's security with a soft blue glow that illuminated Elijah's composed features. As Elijah settled into the buttery leather seat, faces began appearing in separate windows on the tablet's screen. His acquisition team had assembled virtually. Jennifer Chen, his lead counsel, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Marcus Rodriguez, head of corporate transitions with his trademark red tie. And Dr. Sarah Chen from Civil Ethics, glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed notes. Each of them wore the focused expression of people who had been preparing for this moment for months, their dedication evident in the alert posture they all maintained despite the early hour. "Systems are ready," Marcus reported, his voice coming through clearly on the vehicle's premium speakers that made it feel as if he were sitting right beside Elijah. "All preparatory protocols are in place. The security team confirmed zero resistance so far." Jennifer nodded, her image crisp on the screen. "Legal framework is activated. We can initiate emergency board procedures under Article 7, Section 3 of their bylaws. Their own corporate rules will be the very tool that enables this transition." The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the morning traffic. Elijah adjusted the tablet's angle, ensuring optimal viewing for the upcoming confrontation. His team had rehearsed this moment, gaming out every possible reaction and response, spending countless late nights ensuring nothing could derail their carefully orchestrated plan. Within 90 minutes of securing board control, the machinery of corporate takeover began its work. Emergency notifications went out to AstraLift's executive leadership, calling for an immediate session under critical business provisions. The messages left no room for delay or excuse, their tone professional, but with an unmistakable urgency that couldn't be ignored by even the most reluctant recipient. The conference room at Astralift's headquarters quickly filled with confused and anxious faces. CEO Richard Blackwood, a man accustomed to commanding rooms, sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence wavering as he tugged at his collar. Besides him, General Counsel Patricia Morris shuffled through papers, her manicured nails tapping nervously as she tried to make sense of the sudden meeting. HR Director Thomas Wheeler kept checking his phone, the worry lines on his forehead deepening as if searching for some explanation for this unexpected gathering. The large screen on the wall suddenly came to life with a soft chime. Elijah's face appeared, perfectly framed, his expression composed and unreadable. The room fell silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the air conditioning and someone's anxious breathing. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that had become his trademark. "I'll be brief. As of 27 minutes ago, I have assumed controlling interest of Astralift Airlines through majority board voting rights." Richard Blackwood started to speak, his mouth opening in protest, but Elijah continued without pause, his calm demeanor making the interruption seem futile. "This is not a negotiation. Each of you is being terminated, effective immediately, for systemic ethical failures in your executive duties." His words were precise, measured, like a surgeon making careful incisions. "The formal documentation has been sent to your corporate email accounts. You'll find the terms are non-negotiable and include comprehensive evidence of the violations we've documented." Patricia Morris reached for her laptop, her hands shaking slightly as she opened her inbox, the blue light of the screen reflecting off her suddenly pale face. Thomas Wheeler's complexion had gone from healthy pink to ashen gray in seconds. "Simultaneously with this meeting," Elijah continued, his voice neither rushed nor emotional, "all Astralift systems are being frozen. No flights will depart until our audit team completes its initial assessment. Internal communications channels are suspended pending full investigation into the discriminatory practices we've identified throughout your organization." On cue, phones around the table began buzzing with alerts, creating a symphony of electronic panic. Emergency notifications from various departments started flooding in. Gate operations, scheduling, flight control, all reporting sudden system lockdowns. The executives exchanged alarmed glances, the reality of their situation beginning to sink in. "Your accounts and devices are now under legal hold," Elijah explained, as if discussing the weather forecast rather than the dismantling of careers. "Federal agencies have been notified and will be conducting their own investigation into discriminatory practices under your leadership. I suggest you contact your personal attorneys immediately. You'll need them." The panic in the room was palpable now. Richard Blackwood's face had turned red with anger, his fist clenched on the polished table, while Patricia Morris was frantically typing on her phone, her lawyer's mind already calculating potential defenses. Thomas Wheeler simply stared at the screen, his expression vacant, a man watching his professional life crumble before his eyes. Throughout the Astralift headquarters, the impact of Elijah's actions rippled outward like a shockwave. In the operations center, controllers watched in disbelief as their systems displayed universal hold notices, the normally busy screens frozen with warning messages. At gates across the country, agents received alerts about immediate flight delays, their faces showing confusion as they tried to explain the situation to increasingly frustrated passengers. Pilots already in their cockpits were instructed to stand by for further instructions, their routine pre-flight checklists interrupted by unprecedented system alerts. In the executive offices, phones rang incessantly as middle management tried to understand what was happening. Email inboxes filled with urgent messages, each marked with high-priority flags, creating a digital avalanche of panic. The carefully maintained facade of corporate control was crumbling by the second, exposing the vulnerable infrastructure beneath. Back in the SUV, Elijah watched the chaos unfold through various data feeds on his tablet. Real-time updates showed the cascade of system lockdowns, each one executing exactly as planned, green confirmation indicators appearing one after another. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the city streets, bathing the vehicle in warm light that contrasted with the cold precision of his operation. He sat in complete silence, his posture relaxed despite the corporate storm he had just unleashed. His breathing remained steady, his eyes clear and focused. After a moment, he spoke just 4 words, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Now we clean it." The words hung in the air of the vehicle, a simple declaration that represented months of planning and years of accumulated purpose. The SUV continued its smooth journey through the morning traffic, carrying its passenger toward the next phase of his methodically crafted mission, the city skyline stretching before him like a kingdom about to undergo profound transformation. The morning sun filtered through Marcy Whitmore's bedroom window, casting warm rays across her pristine white duvet. She stretched lazily, reaching for her phone on the nightstand with the comfortable certainty of someone who believed their world was secure and unchangeable. Still in her matching silk pajama set, she settled against her headboard and began her usual morning ritual of social media scrolling. Her perfectly manicured nail tapped through her notifications, which seemed unusually numerous this morning. Her brow furrowed as she noticed she'd been tagged in dozens of posts overnight. The first video stopped her cold. There it was from a passenger's phone, her own face twisted into that expression she'd worn yesterday while dealing with that troublesome passenger in 2A. She watched herself, stomach tightening as security led him away. The comments below the video made her blood run cold. "This is straight-up racism in action. Why boycott Astralift? Look at that smirk. She knew what she was doing. I've flown with this flight attendant before. She's always like this with POC passengers." Marcy's hands began to shake slightly as she scrolled through more posts. The video had been shared thousands of times, each share bringing new waves of outrage. Her name was everywhere, attached to hashtags she didn't want to read. "This can't be happening," she muttered, switching apps to check her work schedule for the day. The Astralift employee portal prompted her for her login credentials. She entered them carefully, double-checking each character. "Access denied" flashed across her screen in bold red letters. She tried again, and again. Each attempt met with the same harsh response. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. She pulled her silk robe tighter around herself and peered through the peephole. A courier in a crisp uniform stood outside, holding a single black envelope. "Delivery for Marcy Whitmore," he announced when she opened the door cautiously. The envelope was heavy, made of expensive paper sealed with what looked like actual wax. Her name was written in elegant silver script across the front. She signed for it with trembling fingers and retreated back into her condo. In her kitchen, under the harsh fluorescent lights, she broke the seal. The envelope contained 3 items. The first was a check, printed on premium paper stock. Her eyes widened at the amount. $1. $1 written out in both numbers and words as precise and formal as a death sentence. The second item made her gasp. It was a high-quality photograph, printed on glossy paper. There she was, captured in perfect clarity, smirking as that man was being escorted off the plane. The image was crystal clear, taken from an angle she recognized. It had to be from the plane's internal security system. The timestamp in the corner confirmed it. The third item was a note handwritten on thick cream-colored cardstock. The handwriting was bold, precise, and masculine. "You made your choice." E.W. Marcy flipped the photo over and over in her hands, her mind racing. Only someone with direct access to Astralift's security systems could have obtained this image. Who was E.W., the passenger from yesterday? But how could he have possibly... Her phone buzzed aggressively on the counter, drawing her attention back to the growing social media storm. Her name was trending now, but with a new twist. Former colleagues were speaking out, sharing screenshots of old text messages, emails, and internal complaints. Remember when she had that Nigerian doctor removed from first class because she didn't believe his ticket was real? She wrote me up for my unprofessional hair when I wore my natural curls. Meanwhile, Sarah got praised for her beachy waves. Filed 3 complaints about her treatment of passengers of color, all lost by HR. Marcy threw her phone across the room as if it had burned her. It clattered against the wall and fell behind her potted fern. The sound echoed through her suddenly too quiet condo. Her laptop sat on her desk and she rushed to it, hands shaking as she logged into her personal email. There it was, time-stamped from 6 a.m. that morning. Notice of immediate termination. The letter was cold, clinical, and absolute. No severance package, no opportunity for appeal, no chance for explanation. 20 years of service ended in a few paragraphs of legal terminology. A movement outside her window caught her attention. Across the street, where she could usually see the Astralift logo on a billboard near LAX, something was changing. Workers were carefully removing the familiar blue and silver signage. In its place, they were mounting new letters in deep green. Evergreen Air. Marcy pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her window, watching as piece by piece, the company she'd given 2 decades of her life to was literally being dismantled before her eyes. Her phone continued to buzz somewhere behind the fern, each notification another brick pulled from the foundation of the life she'd built. The morning sun still streamed through her windows, but it no longer felt warm. Instead, it felt harsh and exposing, illuminating every corner of her carefully constructed world as it crumbled around her. The pristine white of her condo, once a point of pride, now felt sterile and empty. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of aircraft taking off, planes she would never again work on. She slid down to sit on her plush carpet, the black envelope still clutched in her hand, that $1 check and damning photograph spilled out beside her. The handwritten note seemed to stare up at her accusingly. You made your choice. Indeed, she had over and over again, day after day, passenger after passenger. And now, in the harsh light of consequence, those choices had finally chosen her back. The Dallas sunrise painted the Astralift headquarters in shades of amber, its glass facade reflecting the early morning light. Employees began arriving for their regular workday, coffee cups in hand, briefcases and laptop bags slung over shoulders. The usual morning chatter filled the air as they approached the building's main entrance. Sarah Chen, a marketing coordinator of 5 years, was the first to notice something was wrong. Her access card, which had worked perfectly yesterday, now emitted an angry red light instead of the usual green. She tried again, frowning at the card reader. "Hey, mine's not working either," called out Marcus Rodriguez from accounting, waving his card. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered at the entrance. Dozens of employees, from various departments, all encountered the same issue. Through the glass doors, they could see the reception desk was conspicuously empty. Monica, who'd manned that station for over a decade, was nowhere to be seen. Inside the lobby, every monitor that usually displayed flight schedules and company announcements now showed a simple blue screen. The WardCorps logo, sleek and minimalist, dominated the display, accompanied by white text that read, "Operational pause in effect, await HR contact." Jennifer Walsh, VP of Marketing, pushed through the confused crowd, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She pulled out her phone, dialing familiar numbers in rapid succession. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, each call going straight to voicemail. "Has anyone been able to reach their supervisor?" In the IT department, which operated on a separate, secure entrance, Thomas Wright and his team had managed to access their workstations. What they found left them stunned. The entire executive email system had been systematically wiped and redirected. Every attempt to access senior management communications now routed to an unknown legal compliance team. "Look at this," Thomas said to his colleague, pointing at his screen. "It's like the whole leadership structure just vanished overnight." The building's security team finally arrived to let people in, but the confusion only intensified. Department heads gathered in conference rooms, trying desperately to understand what was happening. Middle managers huddled around desks, sharing whatever fragments of information they could piece together. A new message appeared on every computer screen and phone in the building simultaneously. The memo was brief, but shocking. "Attention all Astralift employees. Effective immediately, all personnel are subject to a comprehensive review of conduct, ethics, and inclusion behavior. This is a mandatory process. Further instructions will follow. Office of Corporate Compliance." In a small conference room on the 3rd floor, Rebecca Torres, a former HR assistant who'd been quietly fired 6 months ago, sat across from 2 members of Elijah Ward's legal team. Her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water, she spoke softly but clearly. "It wasn't just isolated incidents," she explained, her voice steady. "We had a scoring system for applications. Certain names, certain addresses, they'd automatically get flagged for additional review. But that review? It was just a way to bury them." Similar interviews were happening throughout the building. Former employees who'd been silenced, current staff who'd witnessed misconduct, all coming forward with their stories. Each account painted a darker picture than the last. James Morrison, a former diversity officer, described how his reports were systematically altered before reaching senior management. They'd change the numbers, water down the language. Any mention of systemic issues was removed. They called it maintaining brand integrity. Linda Carter, a veteran flight attendant trainer, revealed how certain candidates were marked for failure before training even began. "We had unofficial quotas. Too many diverse hires in one class. Suddenly, their performance evaluations would take a hit. The legal team documented everything methodically, building a damning portrait of institutional discrimination. The evidence pointed to a culture of bias that ran deep through every level of the organization, protected by layers of corporate bureaucracy and enforced through subtle but effective retaliation. By mid-morning, all department leaders were summoned to the main boardroom. The tension in the air was palpable as they filed in, taking seats around the massive oak table. The room, usually a symbol of corporate power, now felt more like a courtroom. The large screen at the front of the room flickered to life. Elijah Ward's face appeared, clear and focused. Gone was the hoodie from yesterday. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his expression composed but resolute. The room fell silent. For a moment, he simply looked at them, his gaze steady and unflinching. When he spoke, his voice was calm, professional, but carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "You all know who I am now," he began, each word measured and clear. "Yesterday, your airline showed me exactly who you are as a company. Today, I'm showing you who I am as your new majority owner." He paused, letting the words sink in. Several faces around the table paled as understanding dawned. "The evidence we've uncovered in just the past few hours is extensive and disturbing. Systematic discrimination, coordinated cover-ups, retaliatory practices that destroyed careers and lives." He leaned forward slightly. "This stops now." A few department heads shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One started to speak, but Elijah continued, his voice cutting through any attempted interruption. "Let me be absolutely clear. You will not be terminated unless your record demands it. I'm not here for revenge or wholesale destruction, but from this moment forward, this company will either be just or it will not exist." His words hung in the air, heavy with promise and warning. The boardroom remained silent, its occupants frozen between their past certainties and an uncertain future. The WardCorps logo continued to glow on every screen in the building, a quiet reminder that everything had changed. At airports across America, the morning bustle ground to an unexpected halt. Terminal screens that normally displayed a constant stream of departure and arrival times now showed row after row of red delayed notifications beside every Astrolift flight number. The airline's distinctive blue and silver jets sat motionless at their gates, their engines silent. At Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3, Linda Martinez, a seasoned gate agent, stared helplessly at her frozen computer screen. The usual booking interface had been replaced by a simple message: "System temporarily unavailable." Her radio crackled with confused chatter from other gates, but no one had any answers. "Ma'am, I need to get to Phoenix today." A red-faced businessman leaned over her counter, waving his boarding pass. Behind him, a line of increasingly frustrated passengers stretched toward the terminal's main corridor. "I understand, sir," Linda replied, her professional smile strained. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties. As soon as our systems are back online—" "Technical difficulties?" Another passenger interrupted. "Every single flight is grounded. This isn't some glitch." In the crew lounge at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson, Captain James Peterson repeatedly tapped the refresh button on his tablet. The flight planning system remained stubbornly offline. Around him, Other pilots and flight attendants huddled in small groups, their phones out, searching for any information. "Nothing on any of our channels," First Officer Sarah Williams reported, scrolling through her company email. "Operations is completely dark. Even the emergency protocols aren't responding." At LAX's Terminal 6, Ground Crew Supervisor Marcus Thompson stood with his team on the tarmac, watching as passengers deplaned from their grounded aircraft. Their radios, usually buzzing with instructions and updates, were eerily quiet. The familiar rhythm of pushbacks, fuel trucks, and baggage carts had ceased entirely. News vans began appearing outside major airports, their satellite dishes extending skyward. Local reporters delivered their first breaking updates. Astralift Airlines appears to be experiencing a massive IT failure affecting their entire network. Inside the terminals, travelers crowded around television screens and refreshed news apps on their phones. Social media feeds filled with photos of stranded passengers and confused airline staff. Astralift Down began trending within hours. By mid-morning, Elijah's crisis communications team released their statement. It appeared simultaneously across all major news outlets and social media platforms. "We are pausing all operations for internal auditing and safety reforms. Passengers will be reimbursed." The brief message landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples of speculation and confusion. But for some, particularly in Black communities across social media, a different conversation began to emerge. "Remember when they made my grandmother sit in the back of the plane, said it was a weight distribution issue but moved a white family to first class right after?" tweeted one user. "3 times they randomly selected my son for additional screening. He was wearing his military uniform," shared another. The stories kept coming. Years of accumulated grievances, dismissed complaints, and quiet humiliations found their voice. "Elijah was right" began climbing Twitter's trending topics, accompanied by the viral video of his removal from yesterday's flight. In Astralift's Dallas headquarters, Jasmine Robinson, a junior HR intern, sat at her desk, piecing together the morning's events. Her browser had multiple tabs open: news coverage of the system shutdown, Elijah Ward's corporate profile, and archived articles about Ward Corps' cybersecurity innovations. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes widening as understanding dawned. "He's the ghost in the code." Her colleagues gathered around her desk as she explained. "Elijah Ward. He's not just some tech billionaire. He's the architect behind half the airline industry's security protocols. They called him the Ghost because he could slip through any digital defense without leaving a trace." Throughout the day, passengers were gradually rebooked on other airlines or offered refunds. Customer service lines rang endlessly, but with systems down, representatives could only apologize and direct people to the brief official statement. As sunset approached and airport terminals began to empty, something unusual caught the attention of the remaining staff. At gates across the country, teams in dark uniforms quietly appeared. They wore the emerald logo of Evergreen Air, moving with practiced efficiency. At Denver International, ramp agent Tommy Chen watched in disbelief as these teams began unfolding large sheets of material, new livery for the grounded aircraft. "Are they repainting our planes?" he asked his supervisor, who could only shake her head in amazement. The same scene played out at dozens of airports simultaneously. Under portable floodlights, Evergreen air crews worked methodically, stripping away Astralift's familiar blue and silver colors. There was no announcement, no press release, no explanation. Just the steady, systematic erasure of an airline's identity. At Seattle Tacoma International, veteran flight attendant Barbara Wilson stood at a terminal window, watching as the Astralift logo disappeared from the tail of an aircraft she'd flown on just yesterday. 23 years, she murmured, touching her wings pin. Gone just like that. The transformation continued through the night. Airport staff took videos on their phones as each Astralift jet emerged from the darkness wearing Evergreen Air's colors. Some posted the footage online, adding to the growing storm of speculation and disbelief. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the last of the repainting teams packed up their equipment, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Astralift, a major carrier with decades of history, had been erased in less than 24 hours. not with grand announcements or corporate fanfare, but with quiet, methodical precision. The only trace of the airline's existence remained in the stories being shared online, a digital testament to years of systemic discrimination finally being brought to light. Elijah was right continued to climb, each tweet adding another piece to the puzzle of why one of America's largest airlines had suddenly ceased to exist. 2 days after the takeover, Marcy Whitmore sat in a corner booth at Cafe Luna, her laptop open to yet another job search website. The morning sun filtered through the window, casting a harsh glare on her screen that matched her increasingly desperate mood. Her once pristine flight attendant uniform hung forgotten in her closet, replaced by civilian clothes that felt foreign after years in corporate attire. She clicked Submit on another application, this time for a customer service position with Pacific Airways. Within seconds, an automated response appeared. "Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, your application does not meet our current requirements." Marcy's jaw clenched. It was the 7th rejection that morning, each one faster than the last. She took an angry sip of her now cold coffee, wincing at the bitter taste. Her phone buzzed, another notification from her old work group chat. She hesitated before opening it, knowing what she'd find. "Can't believe we covered for her all those times," read one message from Sarah, a flight attendant she'd trained herself. "Remember when she made that Nigerian family move to the back? Said it was weight distribution, but then seated that white couple in first class right after?" Another colleague chimed in. "Good riddance," added a third. Marcy's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but what could she say? The chat continued scrolling with more revelations, more stories she'd convinced herself were justified at the time. Each message felt like another brick in the wall being built between her and her former life. She opened Twitter, immediately regretting it. Her face was everywhere, screenshots from the viral video, that damning security camera still of her smirking as Elijah Ward was escorted off the plane. Thousands of retweets, each adding their own story of discrimination at Astralift. She'd become more than just a fired employee. She was now a symbol of everything that had been wrong with the airline's culture. Meanwhile, across the country in San Francisco, Elijah Ward stood in his temporary command center, a converted warehouse space filled with screens, servers, and dozens of legal and HR professionals working in focused silence. The space hummed with purpose, each person aware they were part of something historic. Final numbers from the ethics audit, his chief investigator reported, placing a tablet on his desk. 73 senior staff members implicated in direct discriminatory actions, another 152 in covering up complaints or enabling biased behavior. Elijah nodded, his expression unchanged as he reviewed the findings. The data told a story worse than even he had anticipated. Systematic rejection of qualified minority candidates, particularly in pilot recruitment. Coordinated burial of discrimination complaints. An informal but well-documented system of targeting passengers of color for removal or downgrade. "Begin processing the terminations," he instructed, his voice calm but firm. "I want each notice to include their complete misconduct log. Every incident, every complaint, every cover-up. They should understand exactly why this is happening." His HR director stepped forward with another tablet. "What about the lower-level employees? Many were caught in the system but show potential for change." "Offer them a choice," Elijah replied. "Full retraining with our new ethics protocols or standard severance. But make it clear, the old culture dies today." He turned to his recruitment team. "I want you to prioritize every Black and minority pilot applicant who was rejected in the last decade. Review their qualifications, reach out personally. Offer them not just jobs, but positions that reflect their experience and capabilities." The team nodded, already pulling up databases of past applications. Each rejection letter told its own story of dreams deferred, of talent wasted by systemic bias. Later that afternoon, Elijah slipped quietly into the back of a community center in Oakland. A group of young aviation students, mostly Black and brown faces, sat listening to a lecture about flight mechanics. None of them noticed the billionaire in their midst, and that's exactly how he wanted it. After the class, he spoke briefly with the program director, his voice low and focused. By the time he left, A new foundation had been established, anonymously funded, dedicated to providing full pilot training scholarships to minority students. "Make sure they know it's not charity," he told the director. "It's an investment in justice." Back in her condo, Marcy's hands shook as she opened another black envelope that had been delivered to her door. The legal document inside was thick, printed on heavy paper that seemed to carry the weight of its contents. "Notice of civil litigation," read the header in bold letters. Systematic bias-related employment conduct. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching as she recognized names, former colleagues, passengers, applicants she'd dismissed, but it was the sworn statement attached at the end that made her sink into her chair. "I, Jennifer Martinez, hereby attest under penalty of perjury," began the statement from her former deputy purser. What followed was a detailed account of years of witnessed discrimination, including conversations where Marcy had openly discussed ways to target certain passengers for removal or service denial. The document contained screenshots of text messages she'd forgotten sending, security camera stills from multiple incidents, transcripts of conversations she'd assumed were private. Each page added another layer to the evidence against her. Marcy's hands trembled as she reached the final page. This wasn't just a termination, wasn't just the end of a career. This was the beginning of a legal battle that would force her to confront every decision, every action, every casual dismissal of someone's humanity she'd justified over the years. The weight of realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about losing her job or becoming a social media cautionary tale. This was about accountability, real, legal, life-changing accountability. Every choice she'd made, every bias she'd acted on, every person she'd wronged, it was all coming back to demand an answer. She looked around her condo at the photos of her airline career hanging on the walls, at the uniforms she'd worn with such pride. For the first time, she saw them through different eyes, not as symbols of achievement, but as reminders of power misused, of privilege unexamined, of harm done in the name of protocol and procedure. The legal document sat on her coffee table, its pages spread out like evidence at a trial, which, she realized with growing dread, was exactly what they were. This wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of her reckoning. 1 week after the corporate takeover, the first Evergreen air flight prepared for departure from LAX. The sleek aircraft, freshly painted in deep forest green and silver, gleamed under the morning sun. Inside, the changes were immediately apparent. Gone were the plush first-class cabins that had once symbolized status and separation. Instead, a unified cabin design offered comfortable seating for all passengers, with subtle touches of natural wood and earth tones throughout. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their new sage-colored uniforms a stark departure from Astralift's formal blues. What stood out most wasn't their appearance, but their demeanor, genuine, warm, and professional. A young black flight attendant helped an elderly white passenger with her bag, while her Hispanic colleague guided a family with small children to their seats. There was no forced cheerfulness, no artificial corporate speak, just authentic human interaction. "Welcome aboard," said Sarah Chen, a former Astralift attendant who had embraced Evergreen's new culture. "Please let us know if you need any assistance." Her voice carried none of the rehearsed quality that had been drilled into her during her previous training. Instead, she spoke naturally, making eye contact with each passenger she greeted. In the terminal, passengers noticed the difference. Gone were the arbitrary upgrade lists and special treatment for elite status holders. Boarding announcements were made in multiple languages, and gate agents took extra care to pronounce names correctly regardless of their origin. At Evergreen's new training facility, converted from Astralift's former executive offices in Dallas, the transformation was even more dramatic. Where once stood mahogany-lined corridors and corner offices, now existed practical training spaces and simulation rooms. The executive dining room had been converted into a cafeteria where trainees and instructors ate together, sharing stories and experiences. Elijah walked through these spaces quietly, observing the changes his team had implemented. In one simulation room, flight attendants practiced de-escalation techniques with professional conflict mediators. The scenarios weren't just about unruly passengers. They specifically addressed racial bias, cultural misunderstandings, and unconscious prejudice. "Remember," instructed Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a cultural anthropologist leading the session, "your first response sets the tone for the entire interaction. Check your assumptions before you speak." In another room, pilots and ground crew participated in joint cultural competency workshops. The instructors weren't corporate trainers reading from manuals. They were scholars, community leaders, and experienced aviation professionals who had faced discrimination themselves. Elijah paused at the door of the pilot briefing room. Inside, Captain James Marshall, a 62-year-old black pilot with decades of experience, sat adjusting his new uniform. His story was particularly poignant. 5 rejection letters from Astrolift over the years, despite impeccable qualifications and recommendations. "About time," Marshall said simply as Elijah entered the room. His words carried the weight of years of denied opportunities, of watching less qualified candidates advance, while he remained grounded by invisible barriers. Elijah nodded but remained silent. He understood that no words could adequately address the years of systematic exclusion. Instead, he focused on the present. Captain Marshall would be commanding Evergreen's 4th inaugural flight later that day. Throughout the facility, similar scenes played out. Former Astrolift employees who had proven themselves free of bias worked alongside new hires, many of whom had faced discrimination in their previous aviation careers. The atmosphere was professional but warmly inclusive, with a shared understanding that they were part of something revolutionary. In the maintenance hangars, crews worked on retrofitting the remaining aircraft. The removal of first-class cabins wasn't just about seating, it was a statement about equality in the skies. Every decision, from the seat design to the snack options, had been made with inclusion in mind. As news of the changes spread, media outlets began picking up the story. Aviation blogs noted the unusual silence from Evergreen's marketing department. No splashy ads, no press releases touting their commitment to diversity. Instead, the airline let its actions speak. "Revolutionary changes in aviation, the silent transformation of Astrolift into Evergreen Air," read one headline. Industry analysts scrambled to understand the business model, but the numbers were already showing promise. Load factors were high and customer satisfaction scores exceeded industry standards. Social media buzzed with passenger experiences. Videos showed respectful interactions between crew and passengers, smooth boarding processes, and a notably different atmosphere on board. The hashtag #EvergreenDifference began trending, filled with stories of positive experiences from travelers of all backgrounds. Yet through it all, Evergreen maintained its silence. No executives gave interviews. No PR team responded to media requests. The only public statements were simple, factual communications about routes and schedules. At a private hangar at San Francisco International Airport, Elijah stood watching an Evergreen jet prepare for takeoff. The morning sun caught the aircraft's new livery, making it shimmer like a leaf catching the first light of dawn. He observed as the ground crew performed their duties, noting the easy cooperation between team members of different backgrounds. The jet's engines spooled up, their steady whine building to a powerful roar. As the aircraft began its taxi to the runway, Elijah allowed himself a small smile, just barely visible, but genuine. It wasn't a smile of triumph or satisfaction, but one of quiet acknowledgement. The change he had envisioned was taking flight, literally and figuratively. The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing into the clear morning sky. Below, passengers settled into their seats, crew members began their service, and another Evergreen flight joined the growing fleet that was quietly revolutionizing air travel, not through marketing or promises, but through consistent, respectful action. 2 weeks after the Evergreen Air takeover, the media landscape erupted with frenzied coverage of what journalists dubbed the airline freeze. Major networks like CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC ran constant updates, their chyrons flashing urgent headlines: tech billionaires' revenge, and corporate takeover or social justice. In the gleaming studios of CNN's Manhattan headquarters, anchors leaned forward at their desks, their expressions grave as they addressed viewers. "Breaking news tonight," began veteran anchor Michael Torres. "Sources confirm that tech mogul Elijah Ward, founder of WardCore Technologies, orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Astralift Airlines following a racial profiling incident. Split screens showed grainy cell phone footage of Elijah being escorted off the Astralift flight, juxtaposed with corporate headshots of him in better times, standing before WardCore's headquarters, accepting innovation awards, speaking at tech conferences. The contrast was striking. The quiet, hoodie-wearing passenger versus the powerful tech leader worth billions. On Fox Business, analysts gathered around a curved desk, their voices rising in heated debate. "This is unprecedented," declared financial analyst Robert Whitman, his face flushed with indignation. "One man essentially shutting down a major airline because of a personal slight? It's an abuse of corporate power." His colleague, Sarah Martinez, cut in sharply. "Personal slight? The data shows systematic discrimination. This was a calculated response to years of documented abuse." Across all networks, experts and pundits dissected every angle of the story. Some praised Elijah's strategic brilliance, how he had quietly accumulated voting power through shell companies, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Others questioned the ethics of using corporate mechanisms for personal justice. The story took a dramatic turn when Dr. Marcus Thompson, a prominent black journalist and editor of The Atlantic, appeared on MSNBC's primetime slot. His segment began with a devastating presentation of evidence: internal emails from Astralift executives joking about passenger profiles, statistics showing discriminatory removal rates, and testimonies from former employees about racist hiring practices. "What Elijah Ward did," Dr. Thompson stated, his voice steady and authoritative, "was turn the very tools of corporate power, tools historically used to maintain systemic racism, into instruments of justice. This isn't revenge. This is reformation." The camera pulled back to show the host visibly moved by Thompson's words. "But critics say he's destroyed thousands of jobs, disrupted travel nationwide." "Those same critics," Thompson interrupted, "were silent when Astralift systematically denied jobs to qualified black pilots for decades. Where was their concern for economic impact when families of color were humiliated, removed from flights, their travel plans ruined, their dignity assaulted?" Meanwhile, former Astralift executives launched their counteroffensive from carefully chosen venues. Former CEO Richard Harrison, speaking from his country club, appeared on conservative outlets decrying what he called a racially motivated hostile takeover. "This sets a dangerous precedent," Harrison insisted, his perfectly pressed suit and manicured appearance a stark contrast to the growing bags under his eyes. "One man's personal grievance shouldn't be allowed to destroy a historic American company." The debate raged across social media. Where Elijah was right competed with our airline takeover for trending status. Corporate leaders nervously examined their own vulnerability to similar takeovers. Civil rights activists celebrated. Aviation forums buzzed with leaked stories of Astralift's toxic culture. Through it all, Elijah's team maintained near-total silence. No interviews, no press conferences, no lengthy statements. Just one powerful line from his spokesperson, released via official channels. "When the system protects bias, reform looks like revenge." The phrase exploded across the internet, becoming a rallying cry for supporters and a warning to other corporations. It appeared on t-shirts, in memes, in academic papers, analyzing corporate responsibility and racial justice. As the media storm reached its peak, Elijah sat alone in his penthouse apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay. The massive TV screen on his wall displayed multiple news channels simultaneously, their silent captions scrolling with various hot takes on his actions. With a soft click of a remote, the screens went dark. The sudden silence felt heavy, meaningful. Elijah reached into his wallet and carefully removed an old photograph, its edges worn soft with age. The image showed a younger version of his mother, her face tight with dignity despite obvious distress, holding a small boy, Elijah himself, in a Greyhound bus terminal. He remembered that day, though he had been only 5. They had been removed from their flight despite having valid tickets, forced to take a bus across 3 states to attend his grandmother's funeral. His mother had maintained her composure until they reached the bus terminal bathroom, where she had finally allowed herself to cry, thinking her small son wouldn't notice. But he had noticed everything. The photograph captured the aftermath. His mother's straight spine, her chin lifted, her arms protective around him. They had made it to the funeral, but the humiliation had left an indelible mark. It was one of countless similar stories, spread across decades, affecting thousands of families. Elijah studied the photo for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with careful movements, he folded it along well-worn creases and slid it back into his wallet. "We're not done yet," he said quietly to the empty room. The evening sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxurious hotel suite that had been transformed into Elijah's temporary command center. Monitors lined the walls, displaying real-time data streams and analysis. The air hummed with the quiet intensity of focused work as Elijah's core team, a carefully selected group of legal experts, data analysts, and civil rights specialists, pored over years of Astrolift's internal documents. Sarah Chen, WardCore's lead data analyst, stood before a holographic display, her fingers moving through the air as she manipulated data points. "Mr. Ward, we've completed the initial pattern analysis of their internal communications and HR records. It's worse than we anticipated." Elijah sat at the head of a long conference table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. He wore his usual simple attire, a black hoodie and designer sweats, but there was nothing casual about his presence. "Show me," he said quietly. The room darkened as Sarah projected a series of visualizations onto the main screen. Over the past 5 years alone, we've identified 847 job applications that were automatically filtered out based on name recognition algorithms. The system was specifically programmed to flag what they termed urban indicating names. Marcus Thompson, the legal team's lead counsel, leaned forward. "They actually coded discrimination into their hiring software." "They did," Sarah confirmed, pulling up lines of code. "It was buried in their cultural alignment protocols, but that's just the beginning." Another analyst, James Rodriguez, stepped forward with a tablet. "We've uncovered a systematic pattern in their customer complaint handling. Look at this classification system." The screen filled with internal documents showing a color-coded priority system for passenger complaints. Those marked in red received immediate attention and compensation. Yellow meant standard processing. Green, which correlated almost perfectly with complaints from passengers of color, were marked low priority with notes about customer demographics and revenue impact. "They literally created a racial hierarchy for customer service," James explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Elijah remained silent, his fingers steepled before him as he absorbed each new revelation. The room felt heavy with the weight of accumulated injustice, years of systematic discrimination laid bare in cold data and corporate memoranda. The team continued presenting their findings. They uncovered internal training materials that used coded language about maintaining brand image and customer comfort levels. Employee evaluations that praised staff for protecting the company's traditional customer base. Promotion patterns that showed a clear bias against minority employees, hidden behind phrases like culture fit and leadership presence. After 2 hours of presentations, Elijah finally spoke. "Prepare the full report. Every detail, every document, every name." He paused, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Send it to the FAA, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Department of Justice. Then distribute copies to every civil rights organization in our database." Marcus nodded, already typing on his laptop. "What about the class action?" "Green light it," Elijah confirmed. "Full support through the legal fund, but maintain our distance publicly. This needs to be their fight. We're just providing the weapons." As the team mobilized to execute his directions, an older black woman who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room approached Elijah. Her name was Dr. Patricia Johnson, one of the senior investigators on the team. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the dignified bearing of someone who had fought many battles. "Mr. Ward," she said softly, "might I have a moment?" Elijah nodded, leading her to a quiet corner of the suite where they could speak privately. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, creating a gentle backdrop to their conversation. 5 years ago, Dr. Johnson began, her voice steady but carrying an old pain. I was Astrolift's senior compliance officer. I noticed these patterns then: the discriminatory hiring, the biased complaint system, the systematic mistreatment of passengers of color. She pulled out an old notebook, its pages filled with careful documentation. I compiled evidence, built a case, followed every proper channel to report it. Elijah watched her silently, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. They fired me, she continued. Called it a reduction in force, but we all knew the truth. They buried my reports, destroyed my documentation, and blacklisted me from the industry. She smiled, but there was no bitterness in it, only a quiet satisfaction. But I kept copies. I kept everything. And I waited, hoping someone would come along who had the power to make them listen. She looked directly at Elijah, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I always hoped someone like you would come. Elijah was quiet for a moment, his usual stoic expression giving way to something deeper, more personal. He reached into his wallet and carefully withdrew the worn photograph of himself and his mother in the bus terminal. He showed it to Dr. Johnson. I came because of someone like you, he replied softly. Because of everyone who spoke up and was silenced. Everyone who documented and was dismissed. Everyone who fought and was punished for it. He carefully returned the photo to his wallet. Your work laid the foundation for everything we're doing now. You kept the receipts. We're just here to collect the bill. Dr. Johnson nodded, understanding the weight of what wasn't being said. She had been the first to see the pattern, to name it, to fight it. And now, years later, her careful documentation would help bring down the very system that had tried to silence her. The morning sun had barely risen when former Astrolift Executive Vice President Thomas Bradley appeared on Morning America Live. He sat stiffly in his chair, his collar slightly too tight, his tie slightly askew, the look of a man under pressure. The host, Sarah Chen, leaned forward with practiced intensity. Mr. Bradley, you've come forward with some serious allegations about Astrolift's internal practices. Can you elaborate on what you witnessed during your tenure? Bradley shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the camera and his interviewer. Look, what happened to Mr. Ward wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern we all saw, but, well, we were told to handle things quietly. What exactly do you mean by handle things quietly? Bradley loosened his tie slightly. Take Marcy Whitmore, the flight attendant from the viral video. She had 4 prior complaints for racially charged behavior, 4 documented incidents where passengers of color filed formal grievances about discriminatory treatment. The host's eyebrows rose. And what happened with those complaints? HR buried them, every single one. Bradley's voice carried a mix of shame and defensive justification. They were classified as customer service misunderstandings and filed away. Marcy received verbal warnings at most, but nothing ever went in her permanent record. Why are you coming forward now? Because the truth needs to come out. We created a system that protected people like Marcy while punishing those who spoke up. It wasn't just her. It was dozens of employees who knew they could act with impunity because management would always have their back. As the interview continued, social media exploded. Clips spread rapidly across platforms, with hashtags like AstraLiftExposed and corporate complicity trending nationwide. The public reaction was swift and fierce. By midday, protesters had gathered outside Astrolift's former headquarters in Dallas. They carried signs reading, "Justice takes flight," and "Clean house now." The crowd grew steadily, their chants echoing off the glass and steel building. No more cover-ups. System change, not just face change. Black Lives Matter in the air, too. Local news crews arrived to cover the demonstration, their cameras capturing the diverse crowd of activists, former employees, and concerned citizens. Among them stood several former Astrolift passengers who had experienced discrimination, now sharing their stories with reporters. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Elijah sat in his temporary office reviewing the morning's developments on multiple screens. His assistant, Maya Chen, entered with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Ward, the World Economic Forum's Equity Summit wants you as their keynote speaker next month. They're calling you the face of corporate accountability reform." She paused, studying his expression. "It would be a powerful platform." Elijah continued scrolling through data streams, his face impassive. "No. Sir, with respect, your silence is creating a vacuum. Others are starting to shape the narrative. Some are calling this a revenge takeover. Others want to make you into some kind of corporate vigilante hero. We need to control the message." Elijah turned away from the screens, fixing Maya with his steady gaze. "This isn't about becoming a symbol," he said quietly but firmly. "It's about building something no one can dismantle. But your voice could inspire others to—" "Maya." His tone was gentle but final. "Symbols can be torn down. Martyrs can be discredited. But systems, real, fundamental change, that's harder to destroy. Let them talk. We'll keep building." As the day's light faded into evening, Elijah left his office alone, declining his usual driver. He took one of his less conspicuous vehicles, a modest black sedan, and drove south through the city. The route was familiar, though he hadn't traveled it in years. The streets of south-central Los Angeles hadn't changed much. The same corner stores, the same mix of small businesses and residential buildings, the same rhythm of neighborhood life. He drove slowly, memory overlaying reality at every turn. Finally, he parked across from a worn apartment building on East 43rd Street. The brick facade was weathered, the security gate slightly rusted, but it stood solid, a survivor, like so many in this neighborhood. This was where he and his mother had lived after being evicted from their previous home, where they'd started over with nothing but determination and dignity. Elijah stepped out of the car, the evening air warm and heavy with the scent of jasmine from a nearby bush. He walked to the building's entrance, his expensive shoes quiet on the cracked sidewalk. The same door stood there, painted a different color now, but still bearing the same slight dent near the bottom where he used to kick it open when his arms were full of groceries. He took out his phone and framed a photo of the door, capturing the way the streetlight caught the worn edges of the frame. The image was simple but powerful, a reminder of where everything began. Opening his email, he attached the photo and typed a subject line that contained volumes of meaning in 2 simple words: "Return point." The message sent with a soft chime, and Elijah stood there for a moment longer, looking at the door. This wasn't just about airlines or corporate reform. It was about every door that had ever been closed in someone's face, every system that had been rigged against them, every dignity denied. In the distance, sirens wailed, the eternal soundtrack of urban life. But here, in this moment, there was just the quiet contemplation of a man who had transformed pain into purpose, and who understood that true change required more than just making headlines or becoming a symbol. A group of children ran past, their laughter echoing off the buildings. Elijah watched them go, his expression softening slightly. This was why the work mattered. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but for them. For everyone who would come after, who deserved to walk through doors without having to fight for the right to enter. The morning sun glinted off the pristine white fuselage of an evergreen airjet as it taxied toward the terminal at LAX. 3 weeks had passed since the industry-shaking shutdown, and the newly reformed airline was finally ready for full operations. The transformation was evident in every detail, from the sleek emerald accents on the aircraft to the diverse crew stepping confidently through the terminals. Inside the main terminal, passengers gathered at the check-in counters, where Evergreen staff processed a unique offering, lifetime passes being distributed to former Astrolift frequent flyers. The gesture wasn't just about customer retention. It was a statement of intent, a peace offering that acknowledged past wrongs while promising a better future. "We appreciate your patience during our transition," a check-in agent said warmly to an elderly couple, her name tag displaying both English and Spanish translations. "Your lifetime passes are now active, and we've added extra miles as a thank you for your understanding. Throughout the terminal, the difference in atmosphere was palpable. Gone were the rigid class distinctions and subtle hierarchies that had marked Astralift's operations. Instead, Evergreen promoted a culture of genuine service and respect that extended to every passenger, regardless of status or background. In his temporary command center, Elijah Ward sat surrounded by monitors, each displaying footage from different test flights. These weren't ordinary trial runs, they were carefully orchestrated evaluations, with anonymous assessors scattered throughout the cabins, rating every interaction for professionalism, courtesy, and most importantly, fairness. On one screen, a flight attendant named James handled a tense situation with remarkable grace. A mother had been accidentally separated from her young daughter during boarding due to a system glitch. Instead of dismissing her concerns or suggesting she wait until after takeoff, James immediately began problem-solving. "Ma'am, I completely understand your concern," James said, his voice calm and empathetic. "Let me see what we can do to fix this right away." He scanned the cabin quickly, then approached another passenger. "Sir, would you be willing to switch seats? We have a mother and daughter who were accidentally separated." The passenger agreed without hesitation, and within minutes the situation was resolved. The mother's relief was visible as she settled next to her daughter, both of them thanking James profusely. Elijah watched the interaction carefully, noting how different it was from the rigid, often dismissive behavior that had characterized Astralift's service. He nodded in approval, making a note to commend the training team's effectiveness. Another monitor showed a different flight where a passenger in a wheelchair was being assisted with exceptional care and dignity. The crew member took time to ensure the passenger's comfort, never rushing or showing impatience. These were the small but crucial changes that marked the difference between performative service and genuine care. In the corporate headquarters, the transformation was equally dramatic. The former executive floors had been converted into training centers and operational hubs. Where once hung portraits of past CEOs, now displayed were the company's new core values, written in multiple languages: dignity, respect, equality, service. A legal courier arrived with an important update, heading straight for Elijah's office. The document bore the FAA's official seal, final approval for Evergreen's restructuring plans. More significantly, it contained confirmation that Astralift's corporate charter had been officially dissolved. The old airline wasn't just being rebranded, it was being erased from existence, its problematic legacy replaced by something new and better. As evening approached, Elijah made his way to the main hangar at LAX. The massive space echoed with the sounds of work crews as they attended to the last remaining task in the transformation. The final Astralift-branded aircraft sat under bright lights, its old livery being steadily covered by Evergreen's colors. The process was methodical, almost ceremonial, each stroke of paint erasing another trace of the past. Workers moved with purpose, some on elevated platforms carefully applying the new emerald accents, others below ensuring every detail was perfect. The scene represented more than just a cosmetic change. It was the final step in a complete systematic overhaul. As Elijah stood watching the work, footsteps approached from behind. A woman in her 50s wearing an Evergreen pilot's uniform walked up beside him. Captain Sarah Matthews had applied to Astralift 5 times over the years. Each application met with rejection despite her impressive qualifications and experience. Now she stood tall in her new uniform, 4 stripes gleaming on her shoulders. She looked up at the aircraft being transformed, then turned to Elijah. Her voice carried years of determination finally rewarded as she said simply, "We in the sky now." For the first time since this journey began, Elijah's usual stoic expression gave way to an unreserved smile. It was a moment of pure validation, not just for him, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, every dream deferred by systemic bias, every capability dismissed because of prejudice. The hangar lights reflected off the fresh paint of the aircraft, the new Evergreen logo emerging bright and clear against the white fuselage. The old Astralift branding disappeared stroke by stroke, like a symbol of transformation in progress. Captain Matthews stood beside Elijah, both of them watching in companionable silence as the work continued, bearing witness to the physical manifestation of change. Around them, the hangar buzzed with activity. Ground crew members checked systems, mechanics performed final inspections, and other pilots reviewed flight plans for the next day's operations. Each person moved with purpose and pride, conscious of being part of something bigger than themselves, a revolution in the skies that started with one man's refusal to accept injustice and grew into a movement that would change an industry. The city lights of Los Angeles twinkled like distant stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elijah Ward's office. The space was deliberately minimal, clean lines, muted colors, and very few personal items. A single desk lamp cast a warm glow across his workspace, where a manila folder lay unopened before him. The label read in faded type, "Passenger Incident, May 11th, 1994. His fingers traced the edge of the folder, hesitating for just a moment before opening it. The paper inside had yellowed with age, the typewritten text slightly faded but still legible. The incident report was clinical, detached, reducing a moment that had shaped his entire life into mere bullet points and procedural notes. Passenger, Ward, Melanie, status removed from Flight 2317. Reasons cited, excessive volume and attitude, security response. Level 2 intervention. Elijah closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 7 years old again. The memories rushed back with startling clarity, as vivid as if they had happened yesterday rather than nearly 30 years ago. It was a warm May evening in 1994. Young Elijah sat beside his mother in the cramped airplane seats, watching her try to manage their travel logistics. Melanie Ward looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes betraying the double shifts she'd been working at the hospital. Her nursing scrubs were still visible under her travel jacket. "Yes, Cousin Ruby, we should land around 9. Melanie spoke into the chunky cellular phone, trying to keep her voice down but fighting against the ambient noise of the cabin. "Can you pick us up? I've got another shift tomorrow night." A flight attendant appeared beside their row, her expression stern. "Ma'am, you need to end your call immediately." Melanie covered the mouthpiece with her hand. "Please, just 1 minute, I'm arranging pickup for my son." "Now, ma'am." The flight attendant's tone grew sharper. "Or we'll have to take further action." "I'm literally just finishing up our childcare arrangements," Melanie explained, her frustration evident but controlled. "Just 30 seconds. The flight attendant turned on her heel without another word. Moments later, she returned with 2 security officers. Young Elijah watched in confusion as his mother was ordered to stand. When she tried to explain again, one of the officers grabbed her arm. The phone clattered to the floor. Other passengers stared, some turning away in discomfort, others watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mom?" Elijah's small voice quavered as they were escorted off the plane. His mother's hand gripped his tightly, her palm sweaty but steady. In the terminal, things escalated quickly. When Melanie raised her voice to protest the treatment, to demand an explanation, the officers produced handcuffs. Young Elijah pressed his face against the terminal window, tears streaming down his cheeks as he watched his mother break down, the metal restraints glinting under the harsh airport lights. Back in the present, Elijah's hands were gripping the desk edge, his knuckles white. He forced himself to relax his grip and turned to the next document in the file, a letter that had never been sent, discovered in a box of archived legal records during his team's thorough investigation of the airline's history. The letter was dated 2 weeks after the incident. "Dear Mrs. Ward, after review of the incident on Flight 2317, we acknowledge that the situation was handled inappropriately by our staff. The use of security personnel and subsequent actions taken were disproportionate to the circumstances. We would like to extend our sincere apologies and offer compensation in the form of..." The letter went on, full of corporate platitudes and carefully worded admissions that stopped short of accepting full responsibility. But most importantly, it had never been sent. Someone had decided that Melanie Ward's dignity, her trauma, her humiliation, none of it warranted even this small acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Elijah stood from his desk, gathering the file with careful movements. He checked his watch, just past midnight. The roads would be clear. He needed to do this now, while the weight of these memories was fresh and raw. The drive to LAX was quiet, his electric vehicle humming softly through the near-empty streets. The airport never truly slept, but at this hour it was subdued, operating at a low murmur rather than its usual roar. He parked in the same lot they had used that night, his feet carrying him automatically through the familiar terminal. Gate C-17 looked different now, modernized, updated with new seating and charging stations. But the basic layout remained the same. Elijah found the spot where he had stood as a child, watching his mother cry. He sat in one of the molded plastic chairs, the file still in his hands. For the first time since beginning this journey of corporate takeover and systematic change, Elijah felt his carefully maintained composure crack. His jaw trembled as he looked out at the tarmac through the same window that had framed his mother's humiliation. "We never made it to Chicago," he said softly to the empty gate area, his voice carrying the weight of decades of carried pain. He closed the file with deliberate care, drawing a deep breath to steady himself. "But we'll fly again, Mom." The words hung in the air of the deserted terminal, a promise whispered in the dark hours of night. A promise not just to his mother, but to every person who had ever stood where she stood, felt what she felt, endured what she endured. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elijah's office at WardCorps headquarters. He sat at his desk, reviewing the latest Evergreen Air operational reports when Kayla James entered, her tablet in hand and her expression carefully neutral. She'd worked with Elijah long enough to know how to deliver sensitive information without setting off immediate alarms. "We have a situation developing," she said, taking her usual seat across from his desk. "A group of former Astralift shareholders has formed a coalition. They're calling it Operation Clarity." She paused, watching Elijah's face for any reaction. As usual, his expression remained unchanged, but she noticed his fingers stop moving across his keyboard. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, his attention now fully focused on her. Kayla pulled up the detailed brief on her tablet. "They're organizing quietly, but our intelligence team caught wind of it through back channels. The group includes Marcus Davidson, the airline industry's top lobbyist on Capitol Hill. He's working with Trevor Mills and Patricia Whitman, both conservative media personalities with significant followings." Elijah's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the media figures. "Who else?" "James Harrison," Kayla said, her tone hardening. "The former Astralift board member you removed for covering up the pilot discrimination cases." "Interesting combination," Elijah noted, standing to look out over the city. "What's their angle?" Kayla swiped through her notes. "They're preparing to claim that your acquisition and subsequent restructuring showed racial bias, specifically targeting white employees for termination. They're gathering data on termination rates by demographic groups, trying to build a case that you acted with discriminatory intent." A quiet laugh escaped Elijah's lips, though there was no humor in it. "Of course they are." "They're planning to file for a federal injunction," Kayla continued. "They want to halt all further organizational changes at Evergreen and force a review of all terminations." Elijah turned back to face her. "Get me Lawrence on the line." Within minutes, their lead counsel's face appeared on the wall screen. The older attorney's confidence was evident even through the video feed. "Mr. Ward, I've reviewed their potential claims. Every single termination is backed by extensive documentation, HR violations, video evidence, witness statements, pattern of conduct. They have no legal standing." "But that's not really the point, is it?" Elijah said, more statement than question. "No, sir, it's not," Lawrence agreed. "They're looking to create public pressure, turn this into a media circus." Kayla watched as Elijah processed this, recognizing the slight tension in his jaw that indicated deep thought. "Get me Dr. Angela Thompson," he said after a moment. The screen split, and the civil rights strategist's face appeared alongside Lawrence's. Dr. Thompson had been advising social justice movements for 3 decades, and her insights were invaluable. "They're going to turn this into a referendum on Black power," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "They'll frame you as an angry Black man abusing his wealth to pursue a personal vendetta, They'll say you're the real racist, that you're discriminating against white employees. The fact that every termination was justified won't matter. They'll flood conservative media with sound bites about reverse racism and woke capitalism gone wild. Elijah nodded slowly, taking in her assessment. The room fell silent for a moment as he walked back to his desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Kayla," he said finally, "remember that archive we compiled during the acquisition? The one with all the internal documents we didn't need to release?" "Yes," she replied, already pulling up the relevant files. 112 documents total, ranging from executive emails to buried HR complaints, all verified and authenticated. "Release them all," Elijah said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that Kayla had come to recognize as his most dangerous tone. "Every single one." Dr. Thompson leaned forward in her video feed. "Elijah, that's going to create a firestorm. Those documents contain everything," he cut in. "Every racist joke in their executive email chains, every falsified diversity report, every instance where they coached managers on how to reject minority candidates without leaving evidence, every complaint they buried, every retaliatory firing they covered up." He turned to face the screen directly. "Let them come. We'll burn the mask off while they hold it." Kayla was already typing on her tablet, coordinating with their communications team. "How do you want to handle the release?" "No press release," Elijah said. "No statements. Just put everything online, properly indexed and searchable. Let the documents speak for themselves." Lawrence nodded approvingly. "I'll have our team prepare a detailed legal brief explaining how each document factored into our termination decisions. We'll release that alongside the archive." "Dr. Thompson?" Elijah asked, seeking her final input. The strategist studied him through the screen for a long moment. "They're expecting you to play defense to justify your actions. This forces them to defend the indefensible instead." She smiled grimly. "It's aggressive, it's risky, and it's exactly right." Elijah turned to Kayla. "How long to prepare the document release?" 2 hours, she replied. "We already have everything categorized and ready. We just need to do a final security scrub to ensure no innocent parties are exposed." "Do it," he said simply, then addressed all three of them. "They want clarity? Let's give it to them. Every ugly detail, every racist policy, every act of discrimination, all of it exposed to sunlight." He paused, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "They think they can pressure us into backing down? They're about to learn what real pressure feels like." The evening sun cast long shadows across the quiet Oakland neighborhood as Elijah's SUV pulled up to Deshawn's modest 2-story home. Christmas lights still hung from the porch eaves despite it being March, and children's bikes lay scattered across the front lawn. It was a scene so different from his minimalist penthouse that it almost felt like stepping into another world. Before Elijah could even reach the front door, it burst open and 2 young girls in matching braids came racing out, squealing, "Uncle Elijah!" They crashed into his legs, nearly knocking him off balance. For a moment, his usual composed demeanor cracked and a genuine smile crossed his face. Deshawn appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Look who finally remembered where his family lives," he said, but his broad grin took any sting out of the words. The cousins embraced, a year's worth of distance dissolving in seconds. The house was alive with movement and noise. The smell of Deshawn's famous jambalaya filled the air, and somewhere upstairs, a teenager was playing music just a little too loud. Aunt Regina sat in her favorite armchair, directing traffic like a general commanding troops. "Lord, look at you," Regina said, pulling Elijah down to kiss his cheek. "Still too skinny. Don't they feed you in those fancy offices?" "I eat, Auntie," Elijah assured her, settling onto the worn couch. His designer sweats looked oddly out of place among the comfortable, lived-in furniture. "Barely," Deshawn called from the kitchen. "Man probably lives on green juice and algorithms." The kitchen timer buzzed, and soon they were all gathered around the dining room table. It was crowded, elbows bumping as dishes were passed around, voices overlapping in conversation. Elijah's teenage niece Tanya recorded everything on her phone, much to her mother's annoyance. "Baby, put that thing down and eat," Deshawn's wife Monica scolded. "But Dad, Uncle Elijah's famous now," Tanya protested. "He's trending like every week." "Your uncle's been famous," Regina corrected, spooning more rice onto Elijah's plate despite his protests. "Just didn't need to show off about it." She settled back in her chair, her eyes growing distant. "Remember when your mama first got that job at the bank, Elijah? Working those long hours, taking 3 buses just to get there some days." The table grew quieter, everyone knowing the weight these memories carried. Elijah nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "That woman had more determination than anyone I ever knew," Regina continued. "Working full-time, raising you by herself, still finding time to help at the church food bank. Never complained neither, even when things got real tight. The whole block used to help watch him when she worked late," Deshawn added, gesturing with his fork. "Remember that, E? You'd do your homework at everybody's kitchen table, rotating houses like it was your own personal study hall." Elijah's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Johnson next door used to quiz me on my multiplication tables." "And now look at you," Monica said warmly. "The neighborhood's so proud, even if they don't say it out loud. My mother calls me every time you're in the news." "Speaking of which," Tanya piped up, phone still in hand, "why don't you ever smile in pictures, Uncle Elijah? Like, every photo of you, you look so serious." The question landed heavily in the room. Deshawn shot his daughter a look, but Elijah held up a hand. "It's a fair question," he said quietly. "I suppose I've never felt there was much to smile about in those moments." Deshawn set down his fork, his expression growing serious. "That's what worries me, bro. You changed the world, or at least a piece of it. But did it change you?" He leaned forward, his voice carrying the special license that only family can claim. "Sometimes I wonder if you're so focused on fixing things that you forgot how to just be." Tension crept into Elijah's shoulders. "There's work to be done." "There's always work to be done," Deshawn countered. "But at what cost? When's the last time you did something just because it brought you joy? When's the last time you let yourself rest?" "I rest when—" "Nah, I mean really rest. Not planning the next move, not calculating outcomes, just being present, like you are right now, with family." The kids had grown quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Monica quietly ushered them into the kitchen for dessert, leaving the adults to their discussion. "What would you have me do?" Elijah asked, an edge creeping into his voice. "Ignore what needs to be fixed? Look the other way like everyone else does?" "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it," Deshawn replied firmly. "But there's a difference between making change and making it your whole life, between seeking justice and seeking vengeance." "Is there?" Elijah's voice was quiet but intense. "When the system is built to break people, is there really a difference?" Regina reached across the table and took Elijah's hand, her touch immediately drawing some of the tension from his frame. "There is, baby. And your mama knew it too. She fought hard, but she never let the fight steal her joy. Remember how she used to dance in the kitchen? How she'd sing while she did her paperwork?" Elijah's expression cracked slightly, a flash of vulnerability showing through his careful composure. "I remember." The evening wound down slowly after that, the earlier tension dissolving into softer conversations and shared memories. When it was time to leave, Regina held Elijah longer than usual in their goodbye hug. Just before letting go, she whispered in his ear, "Your mama would have wanted joy too, not just justice." The words followed him as he drove back to his hotel, echoing in his mind as he rode the elevator to his suite. Inside, he opened his laptop, the blue light illuminating his face in the darkness. After a long moment, he created a new folder and labeled it Phase 3, Legacy. He sat there, cursor blinking, Regina's words still ringing in his ears, Deshawn's questions about joy and rest mingling with memories of his mother dancing in their small kitchen, finding moments of light even in the darkest times. The early morning air at LAX hummed with anticipation as ground crews prepared Evergreen Air's inaugural public flight. Flight 1994, a number chosen with quiet purpose, stood gleaming on the tarmac, its fresh green and silver livery catching the first rays of dawn. The destination board displayed Chicago O'Hare in clear LED letters, a route that carried decades of wait for one silent observer. Elijah Ward stood at the edge of the private observation area, hands clasped behind his back. He wore a simple black suit today instead of his usual casual attire, a conscious choice to mark the occasion. His face remained characteristically composed, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers occasionally flexed against each other. The pre-flight checklist was being conducted with meticulous care. In the cockpit, Captain Marcus Williams, a veteran pilot with 20 years of experience and 5 rejection letters from Astralift, led his crew through their preparations. His co-pilot, Sarah Chen, had faced similar barriers in her career. The third pilot, James Washington, had been told countless times that his profile didn't match their needs. Now they sat in the cockpit of a brand new Airbus A321, their shoulders straight, their movements precise and professional. Inside the cabin, lead flight attendant Michael Torres adjusted his crisp uniform collar. 2 years ago, he'd been sleeping in his car, his veterans' benefits tied up in bureaucratic limbo. Now, after completing Evergreen's intensive training program, one specifically designed for veterans and others seeking second chances, he stood ready to lead his crew with the same discipline he'd learned in the service. Passengers began boarding precisely on schedule. There was a noticeable difference in the process. No rushed herding, no arbitrary upgrades, no subtle discrimination in seat assignments. The cabin crew greeted each person with genuine warmth, regardless of appearance or ticket class. The interior layout itself spoke volumes. No first class, just comfortable, equal-sized seats throughout. From his position on the ground, Elijah watched each interaction through the windows, his dark eyes missing nothing. He'd been offered, expected even, to be on this flight, to make it a media moment. But that wasn't his way. This journey wasn't about him. It was about something larger, something his mother had taught him through her silence and strength. The ground crew completed their final checks. The jet bridge slowly pulled away from the aircraft. Captain Williams's voice came clear and calm over the radio, requesting clearance for pushback. Elijah's phone buzzed with a notification. Every passenger had found an envelope waiting in their seat pocket. Inside each envelope was a letter, personally drafted by Elijah over several sleepless nights. The paper was high quality, the words carefully chosen. Dear passenger, you are not just taking a flight today. You are participating in a correction of history, though you may not know it. What you're boarding was built from silence, shame, and steel. The silence of those who were turned away, the shame of those who did the turning, and the steel of those who refused to accept that this was how things had to be. This airline exists because too many people were told they didn't belong in the sky. It exists because one day in 1994, a mother and her son were removed from a flight to Chicago, and that son never forgot the look in his mother's eyes. Today, you're helping write a new chapter, not through grand gestures or speeches, but through the simple act of being treated with dignity, regardless of who you are or how you look. Thank you for being part of this story. Sincerely, Elijah Ward. The engines spun to life, their steady whine building to a familiar roar. Ground marshals guided the aircraft with practiced precision, their orange wands glowing in the morning light. Elijah's posture remained perfectly still as the plane taxied toward the runway. In the control tower, air traffic controllers cleared Flight 1994 for takeoff. Captain Williams acknowledged with professional calm, but those in the cockpit could hear the pride in his voice. The aircraft aligned with the runway, its nose pointing toward Chicago and toward something more than just a destination. The engines powered up, and the plane began its takeoff roll. Elijah watched as the wheels left the ground, the moment of transition from earth to air happening with grace and power. The landing gear retracted with a subtle thump that he could feel even from his position on the ground. The aircraft banked gently, catching the morning sun on its wings as it climbed into the sky. He kept his eyes on the plane until it disappeared into a bank of clouds, becoming just another silver speck in the vast blue above. Only then did he turn and walk across the tarmac toward a black Tesla parked in the private lot. His steps were measured, unhurried. Opening the car door, he paused. On the passenger seat sat a small wooden box, hand-carved with subtle patterns that caught the light. He picked it up with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy things. The wood was warm to the touch, as if it held memories of its own. Elijah opened the box slowly. Inside, protected by a layer of acid-free tissue paper, lay a laminated boarding pass. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the text was still clear. Ward, Melanie. Flight 2241, Los Angeles, Chicago, May 11, 1994. His fingers hovered over the plastic-encased paper, not quite touching it. In his mind, he could see his mother's hands holding this same ticket, could hear her voice trying to explain to him why they had to leave the plane. He remembered how she'd kept her head high even as security led them away, how she'd squeezed his hand 3 times. Their secret code for, "I love you." "We made it," he whispered, the words barely audible even in the quiet car. The boarding pass caught the sunlight, the old airline's logo now faded and irrelevant. Above, somewhere in the gathering morning traffic of aircraft, Flight 1994 continued its climb toward Chicago, carrying with it the weight of the past and the promise of something new. The marble halls of the Capitol echoed with footsteps as Elijah Ward walked through security. His presence drew subtle glances from staffers and guards, not for his fame, but for the quiet authority he carried. The hearing room waited ahead, already packed with journalists, lawyers, and curious onlookers. The Shadow Board Coalition had arranged themselves strategically at their table. Former Astralift board member Richard Kensington sat front and center, his expensive suit and carefully arranged papers suggesting both wealth and wounded pride. Beside him, airline lobbyist Patricia Dearborn whispered to their lead counsel, while conservative pundit Wesley Matthews adjusted his red tie, clearly aware of the cameras. Elijah took his seat without fanfare. No entourage, no stack of documents, just a single manila envelope placed carefully before him. His lawyer, Sarah Chen, arranged her materials with practiced efficiency, but Elijah's attention remained forward, his expression unreadable. Committee members filed in as the gallery settled. Chairman Roberts called the hearing to order, his gavel cracked sharp in the sudden quiet. "We are here today to address serious allegations regarding the acquisition and restructuring of Astralift Airlines by WardCore Technologies, specifically the actions taken by CEO Elijah Ward." The Shadow Board's presentation began with calculated precision. Security footage played on large screens, terminated employees being escorted out, locked office doors, grounded planes. Their lawyer, James Morrison, painted each image with careful words. What we witnessed was not corporate reform, but systematic targeting. Mr. Ward used his technological expertise not to improve an airline, but to dismantle it based on personal grievance and racial bias. They showed statistics. 68% of terminated employees were white. 82% of new hires were minorities. Morrison's voice carried practiced outrage as he pointed to each number. This is textbook discrimination merely in reverse. Elijah's team responded with methodical devastation. Sarah Chen approached the evidence table with a thick binder. "I'd like to enter into Evidence Exhibit C, internal HR records from Astralift spanning the past 5 years. The screens filled with email chains, chat logs, and personnel reports. In one message thread, executives joked about urban applicants. Another showed systematic filtering of resumes based on ethnic-sounding names. A former flight attendant, Jessica Martinez, took the stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I was terminated during the restructuring, and yes, I'm white, but I wasn't fired for being white. I was fired because I participated in a toxic culture. I made jokes I shouldn't have made. I treated certain passengers differently. I deserved to lose my job." She paused, swallowing hard. What Mr. Ward did wasn't revenge, it was cleaning house, and that house needed cleaning. The morning continued with technical testimony about acquisition procedures, voting rights, and corporate governance. Elijah remained still through it all, his attention never wavering despite the hours of legal maneuvering. Finally, Chairman Roberts called him to testify. Elijah approached the podium with the same measured calm he'd shown all morning. He didn't reach for notes or prepare any opening statement. Instead, He removed a single photograph from his manila envelope and held it up for the committee to see. The image showed a young black woman being led off an airplane by security officers. Her head was high despite tears on her cheeks. A small boy clutched her hand, Elijah at age 7, watching his mother's humiliation with wide eyes. May 11th, 1994, Elijah said, his voice carrying easily through the now silent room. My mother was removed from a flight because she spoke too loudly while arranging childcare by phone. The attendant said she was disrupting the comfort of other passengers. He placed the photo carefully on the podium. I learned to code because technology doesn't care what you look like. It judges actions, not appearance. When my company flagged Astrolift's pattern of discrimination, I didn't act out of revenge. I acted out of responsibility. His dark eyes swept the room, meeting gazes directly. They taught me to code to protect systems. I used that skill to protect people. I didn't shut down an airline. I exposed one. The silence held for several heartbeats after he finished. Even the shadow board lawyers seemed caught in the weight of his words. When the tribunal adjourned hours later, their decision was clear. No charges would be filed. Evergreen Air's ownership structure would remain intact. The shadow board's coalition began packing their briefcases. Their earlier confidence deflated. Outside, the autumn air carried a hint of winter as Elijah emerged from the building. Camera flashes erupted immediately. Reporters shouted questions, thrust microphones forward, pressed against the security barrier. Mr. Ward, do you consider this a victory? Will you expand Evergreen's routes? What's your response to accusations of reverse discrimination? Elijah moved past them with the same quiet purpose he'd shown all day. But near the bottom of the steps, a small figure caught his attention. A young black boy, maybe 9 or 10, stood clutching a toy airplane. His mother waited nearby, watching with careful hope. Mr. Ward, the boy's voice was barely above a whisper. I want to fly too. Elijah stopped. For the first time that day, his composed expression softened into a genuine smile. You will? 1 year had passed since the federal hearing, and Evergreen Air had transformed from a bold experiment into a quiet revolution in the skies. The airline now operated 87 routes across the country, each flight a testament to what excellence without bias looked like. Customer satisfaction hovered at 98%, a number that seemed almost impossible in the airline industry, yet was verified by independent auditors monthly. Inside Evergreen's headquarters, analysts reviewed the latest internal bias audit scores. The numbers told a story that went beyond metrics. They showed what happened when a company truly committed to fairness. Every interaction, from booking to baggage claim, was monitored not just for efficiency, but for equity. The scores weren't just the highest in the industry. They had set a new standard that other airlines struggled to match. The Evergreen Pilot Academy stood as perhaps the most visible symbol of this transformation. In a gleaming facility that had once been Astrolift's executive retreat, 60 new pilots had just received their wings. They represented everything the old guard had claimed impossible. More than half were women or people of color, each one graduating with perfect flight scores and safety ratings. Every single graduate had already accepted full-time positions, their success dismantling decades of excuses about qualified candidates and pipeline problems. On a crisp morning in South Los Angeles, Elijah Ward's car pulled up to Jefferson High School. No media alerts had gone out. No press waited at the entrance. He walked through metal detectors just like everyone else, nodding quietly to the security guard who recognized him but respected his wish for discretion. The classroom was packed with students from the Evergreen-funded STEM aviation program. Posters of aircraft designs and aerodynamic principles covered the walls. A flight simulator hummed in the corner, not a toy, but professional-grade equipment that gave these kids the same training tools as commercial pilots. Several students whispered excitedly when they spotted him, their eyes wide with recognition and admiration. Elijah stood before them in simple clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater. No power suit, no corporate badges. The kids leaned forward as he began to speak, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. When I was your age, he said, I thought computers were my way out. But really, they were my way in. Technology doesn't care where you're from. It doesn't care what you look like. It only cares what you can do. He walked among the desks, pausing to look at the students' work. Complex flight calculations, wind resistance formulas, dreams sketched in mechanical pencil. His fingers traced a particularly detailed engine diagram, and he nodded approvingly at the young girl who had drawn it. "They told us the sky wasn't ours," he said finally, his words hanging in the air. "They lied." He didn't mention Evergreen, didn't talk about his wealth or his companies. Instead, he spoke about access, about the difference between being locked out and being invited in. The students nodded, understanding the weight of what wasn't being said as much as what was. A boy in the back raised his hand and asked about failures, about setbacks. Elijah smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened his usually stoic features. Later that week, at a private airfield outside the city, a small group gathered for a ceremony that wouldn't make the news. Ground crew members, pilots, and a few longtime employees watched as a brand new Evergreen aircraft taxied into position. On its side, in elegant gold lettering, Melanie Ward. Elijah stood slightly apart from the group, his eyes fixed on his mother's name gleaming in the sunlight. No cameras recorded the moment, no press release would announce it. This wasn't for the public, it was for a promise kept, for a flight that should have happened decades ago. His hand rested against his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his fingertips. The aircraft's captain, a black woman who had been rejected by 4 airlines before Evergreen, approached Elijah with a salute. "She'll fly true," the captain said softly. Elijah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. A lump formed in his throat as he thought of his mother's face. How proud she would have been to see her name soaring through the clouds. As the sun began to set, Elijah found himself sitting on a bench outside the Evergreen terminal. He wore no suit, had no security detail hovering nearby. He was just another person watching planes take off into the gathering dusk. Next to him sat a familiar face, the young boy from the courthouse steps a year ago. Now he wore a crisp junior pilot uniform, part of Evergreen's youth development program. Ice cream dripped down his cone as he grinned, watching the Melanie Ward prepare for takeoff. The chocolate smudged his cheek, but his eyes never left the aircraft. "You ready to fly?" Elijah asked, glancing at the boy. The child's smile grew even wider if possible. "Always," he replied without hesitation. His small fingers mimicked the takeoff motion, tracing the path the plane would soon follow. The Melanie Ward's engines roared to life. As it lifted into the clear blue sky, Elijah watched not just an aircraft, but a symbol of transformation taking flight. The boy beside him tracked its ascent with expert eyes, already seeing himself in that cockpit, already knowing his place was up there among the clouds. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the simple pleasure of ice cream and aviation dreams realized. No speeches needed to be made. No points needed to be proven. The sky above them belonged to everyone now, just as it always should have. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.